Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome today. We have a really exciting guest here. Sophie Alcorn is an immigration attorney, and she and I actually met last year around this time at a conference. And I saw her speak and immediately reached out, knowing that we had to have her as a speaker with Talent Collective because immigration and hiring internationally, one, I think is just a really important topic for us all to get more educated about, something that I know very little about. And so I know that her talk was just really eye-opening to me. She last year had talked about the importance of hiring internationally and how it can really help with companies' growth plans. But then really went into the weeds on just educating more about the different types of visas and how to navigate that when you are hiring internationally. So I know I learned a ton. Really, really excited to learn from her here today. As people are getting settled, you can feel free to put your name, where you're calling from, your LinkedIn profile in the chat if you want to connect with others here. And also, as you're thinking about questions or have questions for Sophie, feel free to put those in the chat and I can flag those for her. But since we only have a half an hour, I want to just get started right away and let her have as much time as possible. So I'm going to pass it over to you now, Sophie.
Okay, thank you so much, Krista. Let's see. Now, can you see my screen?
Yes, we are good.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay, great. Well, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm like, where did all my little faces go? There we go. Okay. Thank you. So I'm super excited to talk to you about U.S. immigration today. So thank you for being here. So I'm a lawyer, so I have to do my lawyer disclaimer thing. So just so you know, this is not legal advice. If you need to talk to a lawyer confidentially and have them tell you what to do, that would be an offline conversation. That's not what this is. This is general, informational, educational advice only. So thank you for listening. So today I wanted to talk a bit about some visa basics, like what is the H-1B, because it's the most popular, some other visa types you might want to consider at some point, and green cards and what that looks like. And Emily had a great question about how everything could be changing post-election. So super excited to chat about that as well, and any other questions you have. And as Krista mentioned, you're welcome to put any questions in the chat window, and I'll be looking at that as well. And thank you everybody for introducing yourself and saying hi, and I'll pop my LinkedIn in the chat window later as well, because I'd love to connect with all of you. Okay, so just a little bit of background. I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration Law. We're the top immigration law firm for startups in Silicon Valley. I went to Stanford. I wrote for TechCrunch. I have a best-selling Amazon book called Ask Sophie, the Founder's Guide to Visas and Green Cards. I have a podcast. Today I'm doing another interview with former members of Congress on like AI and policy and how it's going to affect workforce. So I'm like super nerded out in the immigration world. It's really fun for me. And one of the things that motivates me to help both companies and individuals with their immigration, especially in tech, is I'm a mom, and I started this law firm out of my kitchen 9 years ago when my kids were 1 and 4. And I'm an idealist at heart. And I look at my kids and I just wish the world were a place where there was like fairness of opportunity. And so I'm just trying to help level the playing field so that everybody can go to where they need to be to do their highest work in their flow state, where they can contribute, for the benefit of humanity. And just been really excited to see some amazing, amazing companies that we get to represent with incredible moonshot technologies, and normal professional businesses too. So, happy to help everybody, but trying to make the world a better place, removing these barriers one step at a time, one person at a time. My team's growing. We actually need to get more photos on here. So as I mentioned, started the firm in my kitchen. We actually have 18 employees now. And I'm in the Bay Area. We have a couple of people in the San Francisco Bay Area as well. I have folks in Texas and Virginia, New York. So we've been growing lately, and it's really exciting. So I think I get to preview this from the chat window. So We have Karen from the Bay Area. We have Christina from Albania. We have Emily in Seattle, Bob in West Virginia, Kate in Chicago, Melissa in LA. It's so great to meet all of you. Melissa in New York. Oh yeah, and I can talk about employers of record as well, like Deal and Remote. So thank you so much. So yeah, you did it. You told me who you are already, so it's perfect. And if you want to add any more comments to the chat window about like how familiar are you with immigration? Do you run a massive global mobility team in a giant corporation, or are you like the operations and HR person who also has to figure out immigration? It can be a really wide spectrum. So, would love to know more about each of you. Okay, so why sponsor? Well, this goes back to really getting the best talent for your company. And in the tech space, that difference can really, like the difference in your engineering team can really affect your product launch speed, your iteration velocity, your product market fit, and these talent choices, can affect that pass or fail startup outcome. Is this a unicorn company or is it not? Gary Tan from Y Combinator today was writing about how like people try to get A+ at startups, but it's really like a pass fail thing. It either works or it doesn't, right? So you really want the best and brightest minds, and you have to de-risk everything. And some companies are at a later stage and are hiring. You might already have a talent pipeline from colleges and universities of people who got their undergrad, their master's or PhD here, and a lot of them might be international. And it's if you have somebody great, like let's figure out how to retain them so you don't have to start the process over if they have to go, right? So those are some of the major drivers that we see these days. Yeah, so immigration drives recruitment, job satisfaction, retention, your bottom line. Yeah, and of course, if you have a happy workforce that feels that their jobs and their lives are secure, then they're not going to be calling me being like, oh my God, who will win the election? Do I have to move to Canada? I don't know if I'm going to get laid off, right? Like you want team members who are like, calm, satisfied, productive, creative. So immigration can really help with those things. All right, so some visa basics. We have three main buckets. There's visas, there's green cards, and there's citizenship, but there's so much jargon, it can get really confusing sometimes. So visas would be like your F1 student visas. They get 1 year work permits called regular OPT after they graduate. If they studied a STEM degree in college or for grad school, they get a 2-year STEM OPT extension. There's H-1B visas, there's L-1 transfer visas. So that's all visas. They're short-term, they're a specific purpose, a specific duration. Those folks are often very restricted in what they can do, and it's usually company or school sponsored. So it's like very focused what they need to be doing. So they're generally for like a work visa, solely relying on you, their company, to keep them in the United States where they're building their lives. When we get to the green card process, that can be very beneficial because A, you want to keep good talent here long term. B, it makes a really big difference to the people you're sponsoring. Companies have an upper hand in their ability to sponsor people for green cards. It's really the easiest way for people to get green cards without needing to like do a 90-day fiance thing and marry an American. So you have a lot of power there to help people. Green cards are permanent residence. It's the same thing. It's a lifetime status. It's a 10-year card. You can get it outside the United States, and that's called an immigrant visa, but really nobody does that. Most people do it inside the United States through the adjustment of status process. When their priority date becomes current, that's their spot in the green card line. And for some people like from India or China, it can take 10, 15, 20 years right now for them to get to the front of the line. So that also is hard for people. But if you at least initiate the beginning stages of the green card process for people who immigrated recently, then it helps them get other benefits. Like instead of their H-1Bs having a 6-year maximum, they can indefinitely renew their H-1Bs continuously until they get green cards. And along the way, in the final stages of the green card process, they can get work permits and travel permission called advance parole. Citizenship is something that people do on their own. It's an application. You can qualify if you've had your green card, usually for 5 years, but it's 3 years if you're married to a US citizen. And usually that doesn't, that's not what employers need to be involved in, but it's just good to know, like, this is often the goal for your team, because having citizenship allows them to stay here forever. It allows them to vote, and it allows them to sponsor their parents for fast, family-based, immediate relative green cards to come here. So one thing to consider for any company, and I'm happy to chat about this more either now or at the end, but just something I would, urge you to consider is, what is our immigration policy at our company? Some companies appropriately have a very comprehensive policy. For example, I'm just making this up, like, we'll only hire people, like if we're doing immigration, they have to be at the beginning of their OPT with the full 3 years ahead of them, including STEM, and we are going to put them in the H-1B lottery every year, but we're not going to sponsor green card until they've had their H-1B at our company for at least 2 years, but we'll make an exception if they're running out of time and they just transferred here. So it can get very complicated. Other companies, rightly so, have zero immigration policy, and they make it up on a case-by-case basis, and that is also very effective. And so I think it depends on your size, how much you're hiring, who you're hiring, what jobs they need to do. Do you have a remote distributed workforce, an in-person workforce? Do you do hybrid? Are these engineers? Do they have other job roles? What's your growth plan? All of that can affect like what your immigration policy at your company should be. But at least in the beginning stages, just simply getting the right talent seems to be the immigration policy of many companies. And so whatever's necessary to do that, you got to do what you got to do. And it's okay at the beginning to be a little erratic. The big no-no is you can't discriminate based on national origin. And so that's why that, very carefully worded question in job applications is just simply like, do you require immigration sponsorship? And people are trying to get through all of the like data-based automated hiring systems that people have, right? And so a lot of immigrants, to get more opportunities to speak to recruiters and get an interview, might put no. And so because they know that if they put yes, they're like never going to be able to talk to anybody ever. And there's a lot of middle ground categories. Like, if you're on OPT, do you technically need sponsorship? Well, not this year, but like maybe for the long term, yes. Or if you did something creative and you got an O1 visa because you're extraordinary, like Albert Einstein, and you actually have like a talent agent that sponsored you, do you technically need company green card sponsorship? No. So there's like a lot of gray areas. So just, if you find somebody great, be open to having those conversations. That would be my suggestion, because there's a lot of solutions. So, okay, I'm going to take a few minutes just to briefly go through some of these options, and then we're going to switch to a discussion and your questions. So H-1B, most popular, most common. There's 85,000 new H-1Bs every year. You got to have a US company. It doesn't have to make any money yet. We've helped a lot of pre-revenue startups successfully obtain H-1Bs, even for their first employee. So there's really no minimum size of company to qualify. You just have to show it's a real company, it's a real job, you're really going to pay them. They have at least a bachelor's degree or the equivalent. And the job you need them to do is a professional role. It's a specialty occupation in the immigration parlance. And there is a lottery every year, which is the thing most people are familiar with, but I'll have two variations on that in a minute. And then people can get their H-1Bs abroad. Like, you could just, I know we have somebody from Albania. So like if a US company wanted to just put an Albanian person in the H-1B lottery or get somebody an H-1B, totally possible. No requirement to have been in the US ever. and no like US degree requirement. Foreign degrees work as well. People who are, can transfer around on H-1Bs, you can extend it for them, you can change it for them. And then if students are at the very end of their optional practical training, their OPT or their STEM OPT, those work permits usually expire in May or June because that's when the school year ends. But H-1Bs typically don't start until October 1st. So there's a special thing called cap gap to like bridge the gap so that those folks are able to continue living and working for you in the US. So the lottery, it's always H-1B lottery season. We're always doing something for H-1Bs. It's an annual cycle. Now we're getting interest for next year's H-1B lottery, even though it's not even October 1st yet. And this year's crop of candidates are still, making their way to start on their H-1Bs next week. But every year there's 85,000 new H-1Bs. I would say if your candidate has a bachelor's degree, they're probably going to have like a 20% chance of being selected. If they have a master's degree or higher from a US college or university, it's more like a 30% selection rate. And so we're taking names now, but next year's lottery, we usually get things moving in like January, February, March. The lottery opens in March. It's now a digital lottery. And then we find out who got selected, usually by April 1st online now. And then you have 90 days to file the petition by the end of June. And then people get their visas in summer and move here to start October 1st. So that's the normal lottery cycle. And we need a job description, offer letter, if you're a new company, financial documents proving your viability, and marketing materials to prove that you're really doing business, that sort of a thing. But there is this crazy new option that we've done like 50 times, and it has succeeded 100% of the time, whether the candidate was coming from Japan or Austria or London, or they're already in the US. But from time to time, this situation arises where there's somebody whose employment is urgent and important, and they're not famous and no other visa applies. This often happens for like very technical people who have a very specific skill set that's extremely rare. So there is a way to get H-1Bs without the lottery now. And it uses this exception in the H-1B laws that says that people who work for university affiliated nonprofits, those companies don't have to put anybody in the lottery. They can get an unlimited H-1B, unlimited number of H-1Bs any time of year with zero lottery. So this is how the solution works. There are these new nonprofits that have cropped up that will hire your candidate for 5 hours a week to teach US students from underrepresented communities in project-based learning at our colleges, especially helping them give them STEM experience, but it doesn't have to be limited to STEM. So your company pays the nonprofit to host them as a global talent fellow for like 5 hours a week, train the students. You get this talent pipeline of students who are doing project-based learning based on your company's work. And as soon as we get that H-1B approved through the nonprofit, your company can sponsor a second concurrent full-time H-1B for just normal employment, and we can get them a visa and they can come start working full-time at your company. So it's been really successful. I'm happy to chat about that more. But the main thing is, for everything else in immigration, it's flat fees. So for example, like an H-1B might be like $5K for the lawyer, and a specialty visa, like an L1 might be like 11. It's not hourly. For this thing, we charge $6K, the government charges $4K, but that's like for one H-1B. The programs that need to run continuously in the background with this nonprofit setup, they typically charge about $4,000 a month. So that's why I said if it's urgent and important and they have really critical skills and you have the funding. So it's like very important. It can help in extreme situations. So if you're hiring somebody who just got laid off, you want to be mindful that they're going to have this 60-day grace period, but then you can transfer them anytime in that window. If you hire them too late, they can always apply for 6 months of visitor status, so you have a little bit more time to get their H-1B filed. So just being mindful of that timing. There are other visa types, like once I had somebody who was like, oh, my company is fully owned by people in Japan, but we're in San Francisco. I was like, oh, well, Japanese companies qualify for E2 investor treaties, and they can bring over unlimited numbers of people from that country to the US whose skills are essential. So they can get these E2 visas. So if you have foreign ownership, maybe talk about that. We can look up if there's a treaty with that country. You can get J1 visas for people to come be researchers for you. They can work for you for 5 years. It's very quick to get them. Their spouse can get a work permit pretty quickly as well. But the key thing is they really have to go back when they're done with the program, or else your company can get in trouble. So if there's any chance that the person might fall in love with the United States and stay here, you don't want to mess around with the J1 visa. But you can also get it for 18 months for a trainee, 12 months for an intern. So if you just want to bring somebody here temporarily on an exchange, that's possible. L visas are great if you have a company abroad. So this relates to the question I saw in the chat about deal and remote. So if you have a bunch of contractors in different countries and you don't have your own like subsidiary, branch, or affiliate or parent company there, you can't get an L1. So you would need to look at like the H-1B with or without the lottery or one of these other visa types to bring somebody to the US. The L1 is perfect if you end up creating a subsidiary and you move your folks out of deal or remote and have them work for your subsidiary in that company. There's a bit more setup, but probably you can control your tax and employment law liability better by doing it through your own global corporate attorney setup than those systems. I have not heard, I think that theoretically deal and remote could sponsor L1s, but you would have to get them to agree to it. And I have not heard of them doing it. But in order for it to work for remote or deal, once your person transfers to the US, they would still be an employee of remote or deal, and you would still be contracting them out through remote or deal, because the two companies, like your US company and the company they've been working for a year abroad, have to have the same ownership and control. There's also O1 visas. This is the Einstein thing I talked about for extraordinary ability. We're getting these a lot for people in software, and you really don't have to be that brilliant. We get them for engineers, not just researchers. So this is also very possible if anybody had a prior startup, or they had a research background, or there's some sort of influencer, can do this anytime. Oh, and you're welcome, Christina. And then green cards, and then I want to go to questions. Typically 3-step process. This is what employers usually do: perm, then an I-140 in the EB2 or EB3 categories, and then an I-485. And there's this interminable wait for people on EB2 and EB3. Even people from Europe now have an extra wait of at least like a year and a half before they can do their adjustment of status. Perm gets tricky if you've had layoffs. So a lot of companies have discontinued their perm programs in this year. But there are 2 categories of green cards that don't require any perm that you could get even if you had layoffs, and that we do for a lot of folks, because a lot of our clients are doing critical and emerging technology companies. But they don't have to be. You could also just have like a really special employee and they could also qualify. So the EB1A, that's like the O1A, it's especially important for the speed if somebody's from India or China. The EB2 NIW is a lot easier. It's still like in the regular EB2 category, so it takes a bit longer. But this would be for people who are going to contribute to the United States in the future, whose work is in the national interest. And a lot of companies sponsor both the EB1A and the EB2 NIW, or you could let your employees self-sponsor if you wanted. Okay, so I would just say the market's changing, which is exciting. I'm seeing more people want key folks for really important roles to be physically in the US or in time zone, at least available for regular meetings in person. So immigration can be a great facilitator of that. Oh, and there's my book, which is on Amazon and Audible. And I recorded the Audible recording myself, which was fun. I didn't use AI. It was a really neat experience. But yeah, there's our contact information, and I will also go ahead and put my email and my LinkedIn in the chat window so that we can stay in touch.
I got you.
Great. Okay. So what questions do we have, Krista?
I didn't see any additional ones come in through the chat. I did put your LinkedIn and email in the chat.
Oh, amazing.
So, and then I'll also send out an follow-up email to everybody, and it'll include the recording and your contact information too. So people can.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let me just have a brief look through the chat and see if there's anything else I wanted to touch on. Yeah. I think all of this really depends on your company's hiring needs, obviously, and that changes a lot. And somebody has a lot of experience with H-1B, H-2B, that's for temporary seasonal workers, F1, J1, L1, O1, TN, that's a very easy and quick option for people from Canada and Mexico. Yeah, but I'm always happy to keep in touch and be a resource. So thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. And yeah, thank you, Krista. And kudos to you for your growth over this last year. And it's really exciting to see your vibrant community. So thank you.
Amazing, Sophie. I think we do have one last question here. So when we say, will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship, what does that leave?
Well, it depends on what you're going for. I mean, I think you can, if you're interviewing somebody as a follow-up, you can always ask them, you could always ask somebody why do you or do you not require immigration sponsorship? That's fine. Or, I think that's what I would do it. If you have any doubts, I would just double click on that and say why. So, and then leave it at that and see what they say. Because they might say, they might not, and that could be a lot of people. That could be somebody who's on an H-4 work permit because their spouse. Oh, we had to talk about the election. We have 1 minute. Let me do that for Emily. Okay. If Trump wins, visa processing times are probably going to slow down again. H-4 work permits are probably going to be called into question. And he's probably going to systematically undo all of the good stuff that the Biden administration did, as well as spiking up the number of requests for evidence. Again, it's a bleak future. I really hope it doesn't happen for immigration. If Harris wins, it's going to be a lot of good things. She did a lot for immigration in the U.S. as vice president. There's a really exciting new thing called the D3 waiver program, which is where if you have anybody on DACA working for you, you can actually help them correct their status and potentially get a green card. If we do this special D3 waiver where they go back to their home country and get an H-1B visa or an O-1 visa, and then you can either start the green card process right away, or at least they're if they have a 10-year ban, they can at least ride that out in the United States, and you can help them lower that clock. So that's a really cool creation from this summer that will be instantly out if Trump is the president, but is very, very likely to continue. In either situation, when it comes to high tech, critical and emerging technologies, AI, both parties agree for national security that we need those facilities here. And so I think that high-skilled immigration in those fields will continue. So it's a brief overview. And then can that all be done before January? Gosh, I think that, if I'm not sure exactly what that means, but the new presidential term will start around January 20th. So no, these changes will take longer to go into effect. But I've already seen this year, I thought that the USCIS folks would just keep a really high approval rate. But I think they're starting to do some CYA because I've been seeing some higher RFE trends. So they're kind of like, well, I'm going to protect my job by looking like I have a lot of scrutiny over things, just in case. So it's like a slow, like a slow.
What I meant, Sophie, was that you were talking about they would have to return home, and that sounded like a
Oh,
whole
no,
lot of
that's going to take
mechanism.
years. That's going to take years. That's going to
Okay.
be a slow incentive change throughout the system as it
All right,
becomes.
that's fine.
more.
If it changes November to January, we need to
Oh,
call you.
yeah, call me anytime. Call me
All right,
anytime.
thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. It's lovely meeting you and chatting with you today.
Absolutely, Sophie. Well, thank you for being here. Thanks for everyone attending today. I hope everyone has a good rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.